Does cold exposure following exercise actually lead to a benefit to that exercise modality? Hello everyone, welcome back to the School of Breath Science, and today's episode is delving into literally that, looking at cold exposure and whether we can use that as a means to recover better from exercise. We're going to be delving into some of the latest literature. If you look at this channel, my name is McPhilimey, subscribe. Hey, we're going to go into breath science, we're going to look at exercise physiology, we're going to look at sleep and recovery, all those major components that are the yin to the yang. What is cold exposure? Let's dive into there. We can literally, just like the word says, expose ourselves to the cold. People might use this as a hormetic stressor to become more resilient. Other people might use it to connect themselves to their body if they're feeling a little bit dissociated. However, for years and years, it's been used post-rugby, post-sports. Jump in an ice bath, jump in a bucket, jump in a pool to see whether you recover. I can remember when I was 16 years old, you would play rugby out in the middle of the winter in the UK and you'd be freezing cold anyway. Then you'd be at university and you'd be right. The best modality to recover from these sort of things is just quickly jumping into an ice bath. But is that actually a benefit? There are three forms of cold exposure that you could say are the most common. Number one is cold showers. I've been doing cold showers since 2017. I made a commitment just to wake up every morning and do something that I didn't like to challenge myself. And that now is just ingrained in this kind of habit of just allowing myself to just not procrastinate on the small little things that I don't enjoy. We can also use cold water immersion, and that is really not an ice bath. It's not to the extreme of being very cold, but it's enough to stimulate some adaptation, or simply being in the water and being submerged can generate some pressures and changes in our muscles and our vascular system to start to flood blood into different positions, which might be also a benefit as well. Then there is obviously ice baths. And ice baths is where the temperature is a lot colder, it's a lot more challenging, there's more fear related to the concept of getting in. And that in itself has not been reviewed that much in literature on exercise recovery. So today we're talking about cold water immersion. And really, cold water immersion is getting people into a cold water about 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. Now, if you're in over America, I'm sorry, but I can't convert that in my head right now. I think it's about 50, 57, 60, around that range. If I've got that wrong, let me know in the comments and let me know what the Fahrenheit is. So we are going to be diving into a few pieces of literature. And that literature is going to be a meta-analysis. And what a meta-analysis is essentially where they've took all the same randomized control trials looking at the similar outcomes with the same methodology to see whether we have kind of truth laying over in these. And I'm going to bring up some graphs from the breath science certification from the lectures in the cold and heat exposure part there in a moment. If you want to check that out, you can actually see in the comments below, you'll see a link to www.breathscience.com.au. So let's just dive straight in. What are we finding? So this is from Moore et al. In 2022. And essentially what they did here was they took all the papers on cold water immersion that were following exercise, and they looked at the exercise modality first. So at the top left, we can see we've got eccentric exercise. So eccentric exercise is your resistance training. It's your weightlifting, that sort of thing, where we are getting the muscle in this phase where there is tension, but it is not a contractile force in an eccentric way, which is squeezing, it's lengthening the muscle. On the other side, we have high intensity exercise. So this is your sports or your repeated sprints, those sort of things. What they did is they did cold water immersion immediately following exercise, and then they viewed the literature either within 24 hours or 24 hours later. So looking at when the benefits of these components were different. We can see here, following eccentric exercise, if a cold water immersion was done with, straight away, within 24 hours, there was a positive outcome to power. And power is usually measured by something like a vertical height jump. That would be a measure that we would use in sports science. Now, perceived recovery was questionable, meaning that some people may have felt like there was a benefit, others might have not felt a benefit. Significantly overall, it was still questionable. However, there is, within 24 hours, a negative outcome to things like strength, creatine kinase, which is actually a marker of muscular tissue breakdown, and delayed onset of muscle soreness, DOMS, we can see that. Now, when they were to measure 24 hours later, there was a change. Now, there's still an improvement in power output, but now DOMS, creatine kinase, and perceived recovery have actually improved. Flexibility is questionable, but still a negative strength. What we can say here with a bit of confidence is that cold water immersion immediate following exercise seems to have a benefit for power. And most of the benefits are 24 hours later when it comes to things like recovery. So that soreness in the muscles, the actual breakdown of the enzymes in the muscles themselves, and the perceptual benefits seem to be 24 hours later following eccentric exercise. However, when we actually look at high intensity exercise, so this is more repeated sprints, within 24 hours, we actually see again a positive to power, but now delayed onset muscle soreness, creatine kinase, and perceived recovery is improved within 24 hours. Flexibility is questionable, but we have a negative to strength and endurance times. 24 hours later, we're still seeing an improvement in delayed onset of muscle soreness and creatine kinase, but now we're getting questionable on the perceived recovery, flexibility, endurance with a negative to power. So if we're to summarize that graph there, we can really see here that actually the literature is quite conflicting. There isn't just set rules for this is exercise and this is how we do cold water immersion. What we actually find is for a specific type of exercise, there is either a benefit or a negative, but mostly the benefits are towards power output and the detriments are towards strength. Sometimes people might think they're interchangeable. However, power is more about rate of speed, force of production. It's the actual how fast the force can be produced, whereas strength is the maximal force production. And if we look at the actual negative to strength, because this is something that needs to be considered, then we'll move into the next graph. And really what there is this is a paper by Grieg et al. In 2023, so very recent. And we can see here they've got more than 10 studies that have looked at cold water immersion following strength. And at the very bottom, we can see the effect size. And the effect size really is a negative, like a negative 0.25, which is a small negative effect size. It favors attenuating muscle strength gains, making strength gains actually worse. Overall here, this is basically telling us that cold water immersion immediately following exercise can be detrimental to strength. Now, why is this? There are theories of the impact that cold water immersion can have on inflammation, reducing inflammation. And when it comes to particularly muscular growth, we want to have inflammation occurring. Inflammation essentially is just signaling, it's information from our cells so that other cells can come in. We have a stress response, we have a breakdown of muscle tissue, we have pro-inflammatory markers going, which causes inflammation. And then generally in someone who's healthy, who can respond to that, can bring in anti-inflammatory markers. Now, in muscular hypertrophy, these markers are called satellite cells, and these satellite cells are what allow for muscles to actually regrow and to repair and get to the actually building the muscle. But if we dampen the inflammation through the cold, then the signaling of that information is impaired. So therefore, those cells get confused. Where do they go? Do they go there? Do they send as much? The impact that can have can reduce kind of the actual recovery component of the muscles themselves. And now, I'm going to speculate here because I haven't looked into the mechanism itself, and I'm not too sure whether there have been mechanistic things going on, but this probably applies similarly to strength. So what does this really mean? The effect size is small. Now, to look into this a little bit deeper, you would have to go into all of these studies here and see, was it professional athletes, recreational athletes, or sedentary people that they were monitoring? And I would again assume, without looking into it too deeply, that there is a combination or a mixture of different people here. I would say that if someone is trying to be world's strongest man, or if someone is trying to be a power lifter and they're trying to do that at elite level, then it's not going to favor those individuals to have cold water immersion immediately follow exercise. You'll probably want to delay that. However, if you have an athlete who is at the end of a season and they're starting to feel a little bit overtrained, then cold water immersion might be a benefit because the skill component and the ability to continue to show up towards a game with more energy and vigor is going to be more beneficial in that period of time than it is going to be for improving their strength. So if we dive into this study here, that kind of gives us a lot more information. This is a study by Lambord et al. In 2023, and it looks at all different types of recovery modalities and looks at the heart rate variability. So we've got cold water immersion, we've got thermal neutral water immersion, we've got active recovery, massage, compression. I wish it had breathing in here. We can see we're looking at the root mean square of successive deviations. So this is looking at parasympathetic tone or cardiac vagal tone It's the best indicator that we could potentially have. There is the largest impact size or the effect size is actually with cold water immersion with all of these, meaning that cold water immersion allows for slowing down and potentially recovering, putting us into a parasympathetic state following exercise, which when someone who's in a position of overtraining, but yet because of competition, they need to continue to show up because that's their professional role, cold water immersion might be then beneficial for this sort of period. If we're to conclude that, then really we're concluding that cold water immersion can be beneficial for improved someone's power output. It can be beneficial for perceived recovery. And that for me is actually probably one of the major markers. If you've got someone who actually feels better and can show up better relative to small little marginal losses in maybe their strength, that is going to have a bigger impact over a long period of time. So we have to take an individual as an individual. However, it's quite hard when we work with people as teams, perhaps, because we might split people up into doing different things, and sometimes there's just not time to do that. That's the approach that I would tend to take. Negatives to strength and potential muscle gain. So we'd want to look at ensuring that the individual is programming their cold water immersion accordingly to periodization. But finally, we'd look at some protocols. And for protocols, really, it doesn't need to be that cold. 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, roughly for 10 to 15 minutes. It's very simple to remember. Immediately following exercise, unless someone's trying to put strength on or gain, then we'd have a delay, get some protein in, and then wait for inflammation to build, and then maybe do some cold water later to improve perceived recovery. Now, if you want to know what happens with the breath and how to use the breath when we're in the cold, check out my video up here. I'm going to pop this up here, and this is a video that has started to grow a lot of attention. It's how to breathe during cold exposure, and it will take you through what actually happens with our reflex. So cold water immersion, it can be beneficial. The literature does suggest that it's not as straightforward as just throwing everyone in there. However, if you're only a recreational athlete, don't get too caught up in the minor small little things around negative to strength, negative to muscle gain, unless that's your primary purpose and your primary goal, and you have your sleep, your nutrition, and everything dialed in. So next week, we're going to dive into some of the benefits of the heat. So if you've enjoyed the show, make sure you subscribe, and I'll catch you at the next one.